My name is Virgil Caroll. I'm the Principal Human Solutions Architect and owner of HighMonkey in Minneapolis, Minnesota in the US. I've been working in SharePoint for a very, very long time. Started working with it back in 2001 when it first started coming out in there. But a lot of my practices really come from that, actually for many years before that I've been doing web in that. And so a lot of things about web is really focused around people and how you kind of build people-based systems. So my background actually has nothing to do with technology. I actually have an undergraduate degree in sports medicine, and I still practice that today at a local school. And have been there for about 20 years. And my master's degree is actually in education and curriculum development. And when I actually first got into the technology space, it was with online learning. So I really kind of bring the other side that when I actually first got into technology, I was actually a consumer, actually a client of a company doing work for me. I'm going to just skip by the agenda since we have such a short amount of time. You're going to find that I already talk really fast, and I was trying to figure out how to get through my slides, and everybody said talk faster, and I said I don't think that's going to be such a great idea. So if you have questions while I go through, I'm more than happy to answer them, but I'm going to say that if it's a big question, maybe wait to the end and we can talk afterwards, just to kind of get through all the content. Just so that you know, you're probably going to hit the end of this session, and it does have an end point, but you're going to probably say, but then how do I build this? Well, anybody who's brave enough to get up tomorrow morning after the attendee party and come down here at 9 a.m. that morning, you can go through my second session, which is going to basically talk about a lot of things that we did here and how actually we build out those systems for our end users. So let's talk a little bit about why Intranet fails. First, let me get a sign of hands. How many of you actually run what you consider an intranet in your SharePoint environments right now, or in some other system, but you have an intranet? Okay, how many of you think they suck? Okay, that pretty much does that. So I found this a really interesting statistics about why actually intranets tend to fail, and I think this pretty much sums it up of why I'm in the business track right here and why I'm talking about it there. Because you'll notice what the #1 reason, and by a very large margin, is the reason that most intranet systems, most technology fails in an organization. It's because of lack of executive support. Now, I said I've been doing SharePoint for a really long time. So the one thing I remember is SharePoint 2001 was kind of this tool that you could kind of do things, and those things kind of worked out okay. 2003, now you had the ability to add a little bit of security to it in that. And then 2007 was kind of when Microsoft really put a lot of effort, not only behind the product, but actually behind the marketing behind it. And Microsoft sales went out there and they said, you know, you've got SharePoint, and then you've got the way you slice cheese, and it's really that easy. You just turn it on, everybody's collaborating, and it's just a world of goodness and greatness, and everybody's happy. What we found was that actually wasn't the case, but the result of that was there's this mentality around SharePoint that we don't have to do a lot of things that we have to do for other enterprise software systems to really get them to go. And the #1 thing is lack of executive support. I can't tell you how many times I've actually sat inside an organization and they said, well, we want to bring in the new version of SharePoint, but we're kind of hoping to do that under the radar and not really let anybody know that we're going to bring this in here. So you can kind of see some of the other reasons, but what you see here is there's something missing off this list. So we've got other priorities, lack of interest, business-specific issues, policies, costs, but there's something that's not here. Well, it ended up it's actually not about the technology. So the #1 thing we hear in our organization is SharePoint sucks. And I'm here to tell you SharePoint does not suck. It's actually an extremely capable tool set. The thing that sucks is the way you implemented it in that. And that's the most important thing. If you walk away from anything from my sessions is to understand the reason these systems fail is because we fail the system. Technology does exactly what we want it to, and it does nothing else. If you don't understand what you want or what your people want, which is the whole point of this conversation, then you will not succeed. You can buy every tool, you can do everything, you can spend dollars on servers and everything else. But from a business perspective, if you don't have a good plan and you don't understand how to implement and actually build something that your people want, then you might as well walk out of the room right now because you will not be successful. So some of the things that we found is that even though we've improved our systems, they just can't keep up with the changing enterprise. Everything's changing so drastically right now. I mean, technology by far, but so many other industries, things are changing on a daily basis, and things are constantly changing the way we do things, where our employees are located, and everything like that. And then, well, what we had is we found that a lot of it is because we have these perceived business needs, but we actually never really focused on what our people wanted in that. And so we end up that our projects that we try to roll out in these systems end up being very difficult. But the number one thing is right down here at the bottom. Executives still don't understand that time costs us money because it's a soft thing that we can't really touch or feel and we really can't see on a balance sheet. But anybody who's ever seen any type of arithmetic around something like a workflow process or something else knows that there can be a ton of time bunched up into very small activities that people do over and over, or inefficiencies that we build into our system and our organizations that can be handled in other ways. And we've got to get to the point where executives understand that this costs our organization money. And so that is just such a key thing to why we're still having a lot of problem with our collaborative side. The other thing is the resources we need aren't there. How many of you work in an organization over, say, 10,000 people? In that. Ma'am in the back there, how many people do you have on your SharePoint team? And how many people do you have in your organization? So 40,000 to 3 people. Yep, even 5,000 to 3. One of my largest client has 80,000 employees, and they have 6 people on their SharePoint team. Right down the hallway, they have the SAP group. And on the SAP group, they have 245 in that. And I go to people all the time and say, can you please explain to me why SAP is more important and more difficult than SharePoint? Nobody ever has a reason. But the reality is the way SharePoint was sold into the enterprise in the first place was turn it on and go. And so this tends to be our number one issue that we have out there, is that we don't have the staff to do it. Now, me as a consultant, I kind of like that because I end up getting lots of business from those companies because they don't have the staff internally. But at the same time, that's even created a vicious cycle because I go build something that is something beyond what their staff can build. I try to train them, but they still don't have that same understanding because I do this all the time. And we've just kind of created this vicious cycle that we go around. And people experience implementation takes dollars. That's the other thing, is we tend not to invest in what we think needs to happen. The type of projects that we do are 12, 18-month projects that frankly take a lot of time and money, but they're the type of thing you need to do to actually build something that can be focused around there. And technology changes rapidly. This is such a huge issue that we run into because everything changes in technology every 5 minutes. And IT people, they want to, oh, look at that new bell, look at that new whistle, I want to jump on it right now. But businesses, they just don't move. I actually, 1 month from now, am doing what I call an upgrade, but it's not really an upgrade, from SharePoint 2001 to 2013 in that. And still, the majority of my clients are still in 2010 that I'm moving into 2013. But that's the reality of it, is that it's just a very difficult thing. And so no matter how much we want it, what we have to understand is that technology is not going to fix this problem. It can help fix this problem, but the problem fixing starts with you in the way you do things. So let's talk a little bit about who our people are. And so if you've ever heard me talk before, you'll always know that I start out every single session I ever do with this slide right here. Because to understand the fundamentals of the typical person in your organization that did not go to school to learn about technology and IT or understand any of that, is that they look at technology like this. I open up my computer, I ask a question, some kind of magic happens and I get an answer. Now we could probably look to Google and we could say that's the fault because you can type anything in there and get some kind of response back. But the reality is people don't understand anything about what you're doing. All they know is they're going to do something. So if you take anything else away from this, realize the number one thing is, from an intranet perspective, if you have a corporate intranet where you have people that need to go on there and actually figure things out, and the first thing you have to do from that is teach them how to use your intranet, you've already failed in that. Because you could go and poll anybody in your organization and say, what's the difference between an intranet and Amazon? And they wouldn't have any idea, except they can't order their favorite book on your intranet. But they have no idea, because to them all it is a public website that's inside an organization that somehow you've locked down. They have no idea why, but they know that if I want to do it, I got to click on this icon over here and it goes do. And then all of a sudden I'm inside some internal system that supposedly nobody else can get into. And then I open up my browser just like I do when I go to my Facebook page, and I get on there and I look for a piece of information and I click on it and it goes to another page, and I click on that and go to another page. And then you ask them, say, well, what's the difference between that and any other website on the planet? They have no idea. And that's very, very important for you to understand from that. People think this simply. In IT, we like to think of them as stupid, but when you think about it honestly, why should they think any different? Why should they know anything about any of the way this stuff runs and how you have firewalls and everything else in the middle of it? So it's very important that you understand, to really be able to handle the needs of people, you have to understand how simple those needs really are. And so why are people challenges as well? Reality. This is what you consider the 3 levels of context. So we have context, that every business has a different context. Every piece of information in your organization exists for a different reason. And in some organizations, you could have the same piece of information that exists across multiple departments that could actually have different reasons. And there, a very good example of that. How many of you in here work for government? Oh, John, yeah. So, well, government, you know, I know it probably isn't over here and over in Europe, but in the US, they really like acronyms. And that they like to make up these acronyms that have some kind of meaning around it, but nobody knows what they are. But the important thing is to understand that everything exists for a reason. It's why SharePoint is actually a very positive tool, because the one thing that SharePoint can do really well if you set it up is you can store a single piece of information and everybody can find it for different reasons. Because you could have a sales invoice out there and I might be the sales guy that wants to find it for that reason. I could be the project manager that is part of my project. I could be the business owner that is part of my business unit. I could be the customer that it's an invoice for me. It's all the exact same piece of information, but we need it for a different reason. And so that's very, very important. The other thing is we have different content. Content exists for there. There's pages, there's documents, there's PDFs, there's PowerPoints, there's Excel spreadsheets, there's Adobe files, there's this, there's that. There's all this different kind of content, and people need to circulate through all this. This is the #1 reason that we moved into SharePoint in the first place, right? Because where did we store this stuff before? Network shares. And guess what? Network shares don't work for anybody. And so we had all this content, and so we said, well, what we'll do is we'll put it in SharePoint and it'll just all work in that. But it's this last one that we have the problem with. They're all unpredictable. If you think you know what a person is going to do when they go to your SharePoint system, I can guarantee you they're going to do something else. And they are going to do something completely unpredictable. And you're not going to know what the heck they're going to do. And this tends to be the group that provides us. We can figure out content. We can even understand why our content exists. The problem is trying to figure out why these people want to find it in the first place, how they're going to look for it, and actually figure out a way to put it in a system that makes sense to not only them, but everybody else is going to look for it differently. And that's really where our biggest challenge comes from in these systems. So if you're an organization that stores 10 files in SharePoint, you're set. You can walk out right now, because I guarantee you anybody can find one of 10 files in that. But if you're an organization that has more than 10 files, this is really where we have the most amount of problem that we have to deal with. So lastly, the other thing that we have is we have technology. Not only is technology changing all the time, but we've got all these things. So I'll be the only person that really enjoyed the technology behind SharePoint 2013 and hated the interface. I thought that was one of the worst things that possibly happened was the 2013 UI, because I had people that couldn't figure out anything to do because they made it, but it was cool, it was modern, it had these things. We could have tiles on our pages, just like Windows 8. How awesome was that? And there. Well, guess what? That didn't end up doing it. Now Microsoft says, well, with 2016, we're going to delay 2016 for a while because we've realized that people are the focus, so we're going to build a new UI. I'm still waiting to get my invitation to see that, but we'll see what happens. But we have it. We've sacrificed a lot of user experience for trendy, cool patterns. The other thing is, and this is a reality that we hit even more in 08, is that people are working to a much older age now. All across the world, we had the depression. And the reality is that now people that were maybe thinking about retiring at a certain part, they have a lot longer in their lifespan that they need to now work. And so now you've got this huge, gigantic gap from the people that are just starting in your organization to the people that want to stay an extra 10 years because they have no retirement. This is actually going to become a bigger and bigger issue all the time because you have all this experience differential and technology completely changing every second of every day. And so that's going to be challenging in that. And social's popular, but the reality is nobody can filter out that noise. People don't know. I had a client that wanted, oh man, this is the answer to all our problems, is we're going to implement social in our organization, and we're going to have feeds that everybody can keep up with everything that everybody's saying so that I can always keep up on our projects. And I said, do you have Facebook? And they're like, yeah. And I said, so you read every Facebook post that every single one of your friends posts every day? No, it's way too much. And I said, how is this going to be different? Oh, this is going to be different. It's going to be much smaller. And so 2 weeks later, we got a call and we're like, we need to talk. We got a problem. There's just too much information coming across there and we can't keep up with all of it. And we don't know how to process through it. Well, that's the thing is, social is not the key in an organization. It's not, and I know there's people that are going to claim it is, but this is not the key. The key is personalization. It's me getting the information that I want because I need it in that. That's actually more difficult to do with social. Social's trying to get there. Microsoft's trying to build product sets to better anticipate our needs. But the reality is that's just a huge problem for us because I want to do it. I mean, I go into clients all the time and I do business requirements and I'll sit there and somebody says, what I really want is it to know exactly who I am and show me exactly what I want to see at that moment. I don't disagree with them. How awesome of a system would that be if I could just go online and it would show me exactly what I needed at all times of the day? That would be the perfect system. But the reality is very different, and the complexity about building some of that stuff is very different. But that is really becoming the key, is understanding the different types of people in your organization, how they do different things, and being able to better get them to the information that they really want. So let's talk a little bit about how do we really learn about them? How do we really start to understand our people and do this? And so I'll tell you, I've been doing these type of talks for a number of years, and most of the time they put me in the information worker track. But I asked Steve very nicely, I said, put me in the business track, because this is actually the stuff that business people need to hear. I'm not going to talk about anything technically complex in today or tomorrow in either of my sessions. What I am going to talk about is why you need to do it, which I think is so much more important than how you do it, because almost anybody can figure out how to do this. It's understanding the reasoning behind it and really getting this. And so one of the first things is we actually have to understand our people. So from that side, we should always look at our people first in that. And so the first thing that we naturally assume is that people in an organization understand their organization a lot better than they do. It's amazing how many times I go into there and it's like, well, they kind of understand the way things work here, so they understand that. So one of the most famous things you ever see about that is, and you don't see it as much as you used to, but in 2007, when everybody really started putting their intranets and their corporate structures in there, what did they do? They built everything out via the org chart. Well, you know, at HighMonkey, we have 12 people. And the org chart is very simple. Virgil, everybody else. Very simple, clean. You can ask any employee at the office. They can stand up and recite our org chart. Our largest client has 80,000 people. There's not even the CEO that could even guess what the org chart looks like in that organization. So if nobody knows what the org chart does and how it looks, and that's the way you build everything out, is that everything follows your org chart, what are the chances that's actually going to be successful in that? And so I always like to have people, when I go into clients, I like to have them say, well, tell me a little bit about your org chart. And you find that out from a structural perspective. Yeah, that's the way the organization is organized, but nobody else knows that from that side. And then if you really want to have a really good way of doing this, you've really got to think about treating everybody like it's their first day. If you ever want to find out great information about what people really think about how things work at your organization, go find somebody that's within their first month of employment and talk to them. Because what you're going to find out is that everything that you've taken for granted and you've thought that worked this way for a long time, they're absolutely clueless. You know the number, going back to my largest client, they just built a brand new building. And this building has 4 buildings connected by walkways. And on those walkways, there's conference rooms. In every level of every part of the building, there's conference rooms. And the conference room has a letter, which is north, south, east, west. And then it has a number. And then it has what part of that cube area it's part of. And then it's got which is another letter. And then it's got another number. And that's how you're supposed to find a room, or book a room, or figure out where the hell anything is in that place. Right there. Amazingly, people find that really confusing. And so what is their corporate intranet mostly about? CEO talks to people and says stuff that nobody in the organization cared about, but communications did. And that. What should be up there? Is it your first day? How the hell do you get around our building in the first place? And that. But that's the kind of things that we forget about, is that sometimes it's those simple things. You look at statistics today, and still today, 20 years after we started doing intranets inside software, still today, the number one reason people use an intranet is to find somebody else. And the number one thing that most people don't have implemented in their SharePoint is people search. But that's why people go up there, they're trying to find somebody else that I got to call because I can't figure out crap on your intranet, so I'm going to call them to try and figure it out. So we've got to know those kind of things. And guess what? Anybody might need this as a reality check. I hope not. Unlike Facebook, intranets are actually not there to waste time. People want to get to their job. Yeah, sure, maybe there's some people that find the president's words and communications and all that stuff very important. But the reality is most people, they just want to get to the stuff they need to do. I want to get to my team side. I want to get to my activity. I want to be able to do something. I want to be able to find a form. It's very functional based in that I'm trying to do some type of task. Right there tends to be the biggest difference between public websites and internal websites, is that even though public websites can be very functional, overall I'm much more willing to go to the local paper and read through their news. I don't tend to do that on an intranet. I'm trying to get to some activity in that. And so the number one killer of corporate intranets is communications. And me and communications have a love-hate relationship. But I also do public websites on the other side. So me and communications really have a love-hate relationship because we usually very much disagree about what the priority is and those things. So from that side, can we understand every person in an organization? Well, no, that's just not possible. You're never going to understand the wants and needs of that. But you can understand the patterns. And so a lot of times, especially as organizations grow, even though there's different people in different roles, they have similar needs and wants. And it's really understanding that kind of stuff. So a lot of times we'll do what we call personas, or we'll do user journeys where we're actually looking at different types of individuals and actually how they might go through the system and what they might look for and what their wants and needs are. You know, how they might get motivated and that kind of stuff. And what you start to tell from these type of practices is you actually start to figure out a little bit more about what they're looking for and that kind of stuff. The worst thing in the world that you can possibly do is go down and sit in front of somebody and ask them what they want. Because there's two things about that. One, that's not what they really need. Number two, they're going to ask you for, I want this system to build itself so that it always shows me only exactly what I want. They have no conceptual understanding of what they're looking for and really have an understanding of how that really fits in their own lives. So you have to kind of help them walk through this process. So the second thing we need to do is we need to talk to people that don't work for us. If your job is in IT, and when you want to understand something, you go talk to new IT employees, you've kind of misunderstood. You've got to talk to people that aren't related to you in the projects and don't understand the technology, so you can do that. And there's a lot of different ways we can do this. Definitely the traditional requirements gathering, kind of doing more of that business analyst type activity is not bad, but overall what I find from that is you tend to get a lot of wants and sometimes a lot of needs. The other thing that happens from that is that a lot of times you'll say, well, we really don't have time to go talk to these people, so we'll go talk to their manager. And so though I can only tell you one thing about managers and corporations. They only have two roles. Their role number one is not to ever let the little people talk to the big people. Role number two is to make sure the big people don't get to talk to the little, don't have to talk to the little people. in that. And so when you talk about what I consider middle management, they always think they understand 100% how things work underneath of them. The only thing I know about management is they usually don't have a clue. And it's not because they don't pay attention, it's because they have so many things to do. But the reality is they don't remember what it was like to sit at that desk and do the same activity over and over and over, and all the challenges that happen that go through that process on a daily basis. So you have to really make sure that you're balancing the type of people you're talking about. My favorite way is to do what I call a discovery workshop. And so from a discovery workshop, we use a little bit of gamification in there. And so we actually get it interactive. We get a group of people together, and we actually get them writing down what did they like, what did they not like, what would they like to see, what are their wishes, their wants, their needs, and all that kind of stuff. And here's the reason I like to do it this way, is people tend to be very honest when they write that. And you're going to have one person in that group that thinks something's really, really important, that if we don't have this in our new system, we might as well not build it. And everybody's done this. If you've ever went to talk to anybody, you have some executive, some person, something that said, this has to happen. But when you get in that group activity, the next thing we do is we sit there and talk about it. And we have people actually go up with little stars or little stickers or whatever and stick it on, you know, I agree with this, I don't agree with that one, and that kind of stuff. And all of a sudden we start to see patterns. And that person who was the person that said, this is an absolute must, all of a sudden they learn, well, nobody else cares about it. And so it's really good to be able to get to the core of what people actually want and need around there and get them to interact in that process without us sitting there and trying to be combative or do different things like that. And really, if you can't do any of that, you may have to end up going to surveys. Of course, surveys, I can't tell you enough about how much I hate them, because surveys, only two types of people ever fill out surveys. Number one is a really, really small group, and that's the people that like what you're doing. The second one is the much, much bigger group. That's the people that really don't like what you're doing. The people that you really want the opinions of are the ones that are just like, it works for me, or it doesn't work for me, or I'm not going to say anything. Because those are the people that you're going to learn the most from and really understand it. But when you're doing that, you really have to be able to balance that opinion with the questions you ask. So a lot of times what I see when people go in and do requirements gathering is they ask very leading questions, like something that either wants to get to the answer you want or is going to make it very easy to get to the answer that, you know. So instead of saying like, what would you like to see, leaving it very open-ended. I love doing these things very open-ended, so it's like, talk to me about the sky. You know, and tell me what you think about the sky. Most people don't like that because people that go into business analysts are analytical brain and they want to get here. What challenges do you encounter on a regular basis or something like that? You can get very, very interesting to learn about the type of things that people will talk about. And so a wish list build will fail. So if you go in there, you ask a bunch of questions, you get a bunch of ideas, and you decide to build that, I can almost guarantee you that it'd fail in there. And just because somebody has an opinion doesn't mean they're right. And that's even executives. So one of the things I'll always tell you that people always ask me, this is usually one of the statements that I make that somebody's going to ask me a question afterwards, because it's like, but what if they say you have to do that? So if anybody ever asks me why you'd ever want to use a consultant or an outside person, it's for that reason right there. Because you can say it till you're blue in the face, but you bring me in and you tell me word for word what I'm going to say, and they'll believe me. They won't believe you. It just is the way it is. Unfortunately, it's just a really strange thing, but that's one of those things that you always have to balance around there. But the reality is, just because somebody thinks something should happen doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to be a very good idea. So some good examples of information we can get, things that we hear a lot is like HR forms are important, but getting to my team site is more important. We hear that a lot, yeah, people need to find forms, but a lot of times they don't need to find them all the time. It's great that they're in one place that I can get to, but overall that's not my priority for going on the intranet. Number two would say the number one thing I ever hear in an organization is, why do I have 3 different places that I have to go to get the information? So why do I have to go here to get my payroll information and here to get my HR stuff and here to go over here and that? And so people don't really understand why all these different systems. Ant was talking about it right before me in information governance. It's like, they just understand they want something. They have no real idea why they really want that. And why should I have to go multiple places for that? And so that's a lot of times when we start trying to tool fix things. Otherwise, we find tools that can do certain things. Why we fail with that is because now, well, yeah, that took care of that problem. but just because you don't consider this problem similar to this problem, I do, and therefore now I've got to go here, and I've got to go here, and I've got to go here in that. And another one we hear a lot on acronyms. Things that we hear a lot on the wishful thinking side is like, people really want to know about project updates. I love that when somebody's running a project and they're like, people want my dashboard so that they can go and look and understand what I'm doing with my projects at all time. It's really, really important to people. I have yet to find those people that they ever are talking about except themselves in that. But the reality is, yeah, there's sometimes importance around understanding where things are at in a particular process, but overall there's not many people that sit at their desk and sit there and say, you know, I'm really curious what this guy's doing right now, so let me find out. And then, of course, I mentioned this one before, the page should know who I am and tell me exactly what I'd see. But one of my favorite IT-based ones, we do this all the time whenever we're working with like IT support sites or something like that. Somebody's like, there should be a chat window there, and I should just be able to open it up and somebody just starts answering my questions in that. And actually, there are some large organizations from that. But people, this to me is a perfect example of how people don't understand anything about how anything works. You know, it's like, yeah, there's just going to be somebody sitting at their desk waiting for you to ping them so that they can answer your question. Yeah, in a large organization that you've got 500 people on a tech desk, maybe that works. But for most organizations, that's never going to work any way, shape, or form. So I was just threw up a couple slides here to show you kind of the discovery workshop. So we'll do everything from, you know, what are adjectives that you'll describe kind of the website or whatever you're working on. But what I really like to do is this what's important. So as a HR person, I want to be able to find this so that I can do that. So it's kind of, you started it as the type of role I'm playing, I want to reach this type of goal, and here's the benefit that I get from that goal. And so what you find is that you get people to actually think a little bit more logically around what they're actually trying to do and how they're trying to accomplish it. And you'll end up getting a lot better information, because that's the other thing we don't always consider, is that people, just because I'm a single person in an organization doesn't mean I have a single role. Because in most organizations, I'm an employee and I've got all the things that I have to do as an employee, my human resources stuff, my benefits stuff, my payroll stuff, my reporting to my manager and all that kind of stuff. But then I also have my job that I do, which is all those activities over here. And you could have somebody that works cross department. You have all those kind of things. So really understanding in what capacity do they want that kind of stuff in there. And then this was the other side that I was talking about, the what I like and dislike. And you'll see that we have the stars that kind of go across there. And it's actually been a very valuable tool. And anybody that sat in here and thought this was really silly, I'll tell you, when my staff first got me to do this, I was like, really? I don't really want to have people do stars. And if you've actually ever seen the gamification.org site, they actually do this with a sailboat. They draw a big sailboat and you put it up and down and that. I couldn't go that silly, but overall, I have yet to even find an executive, and I do this with C-level executives, that have found this to be a silly exercise and not very worthwhile at the end of it. They might sit there and say, really, you're going to have me do a star or something? But when they get done with the exercise, they really are like, wow, I learned so much more than I knew before about what these people wanted that I didn't really even realize existed. So from there, we really want to, when we actually start looking at this, we've got to build some kind of information architecture. And information architecture is really kind of a very complex process. The funny thing is that if you actually look at the world of SharePoint and almost the way it's treated like this third-dairy or fourth-dairy citizen along the line of importance in there, because we've got to understand, we've got to have our servers, we've got to have our security, we've got to have this and that. Oh, and by the way, we should probably put stuff up there and we should organize it somehow so that people can find it in that. I'm at the exact opposite. Yeah, I think all the rest of that stuff's very important, but overall I think actually having an architecture and actually understanding how our information be stored, how our people find it, and that should be very good. So one of the best ways that we like to do that is through card sorting. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that, so I'm going to wait a slide on that. But we like to do what's called a card sorting activity to be able to create a usable IA, otherwise something that somebody could actually find something in, which is really, really crazy to think about. And then sometimes we'll do navigation testing, where we actually, once we figure this out and we put some kind of navigation structure, before we actually even build a site, we'll actually use, it's a tool called TreeJack that actually allows you, almost like, in Windows Explorer, when you go down the trees like that, you can just ask them a question like, how would you find this? And let them go down the tree and find out that navigation structure. All this stuff gets done before you even build anything, and the reason that's important is because what that really gives you is it lets you know the places that you've already got gaps or you're not figuring out correctly before you even start building out a system. Most organizations, what they'll do is they'll build it out and then they'll launch it and they'll be like, okay, now we got to go back and fix it because people are complaining. So the process we like to do is put a lot of time and effort into the planning and understanding and everything that you do there, and then go to the next things. So card sorting is one of the most valuable activities in information architecture. It's been something that's been done for a very long time. It's highly, highly technical. You take a bunch of note cards, you write words on them, you put them in front of people, and you say sort them. And that. Very complex, very technical. We even use a tool up here called Optimal Sort that does it all for you, and you can do it online, and they can drag it and drop, and you feel all good, and it'll do all the analysis for you and that. But we really do two types. We do what's called an open card sort, so this is now sort them. Now after you get them sorted in some groups, we like to have nice groups and that kind of stuff. What would you call that? What would you call those different groups? And it's amazing how much people do that across the board. And the great thing about this is it is kind of time consuming to do the analysis, but one of the great things about this type of testing structure is that you don't have to have a lot of people to do this to actually get significance in your organization. There's been study after study after study after study done around card sorting type activities. And if you have good content that you're using in the sort, and you use a good random sample of people in your organization, with 10 people, you can get 85% significance in an organization that's 10,000. And that's pretty good. That's not a lot of people you need to do it. Now, obviously, that starts to move up exponentially as you want that level of significance. But I always look at it from the 80-20 rule. If I can get people to 80% of the stuff correctly, have I not just pretty much succeeded really, really well? And so being able to do these kind of things. So the open sort, you actually do this where you let them sort it, and then you let them give them what we would consider category names in that. From the closed sort, we go with a whole new group of people, and now we're giving them the category names based on what we learned on the open sort, and we're having people sort those cards under those categories. This is what we consider our validation steps. So if we get these two pretty much to match up, we're looking at that. And so the way we get it to do is by individual cards. And so you can see right here, here's actually the results of a closed sort. So we're looking actually at the relationship between two topics and how that combines with the overall process there. And you can see in this particular instance, one of the reasons that I showed this is a very good example of where one went wrong. The client chose some topics that we didn't 100% agree with, or they had things that just didn't make sense anywhere. Because you've always got that content out there that doesn't really have a place it fits. That's maybe something that is only for a short amount of time. If you have very big social activities in your organization and you have something that's an event for this small little group on this one single day, it's not like you want that part of your global information architecture because there's only 5 people that ever care about it. And that, so you always have to look at that stuff and really understand it. But even in the best circumstances, sometimes these can go a little awry and you have to do them again. But overall, what you're looking for is this correlation where you start seeing things that actually relate together at a statistical level, and you can actually start to understand how people really organize information. And the great part is whether you're an engineer or a salesperson or somebody in marketing or somebody who works on a factory floor, overall, we tend to generally look at information the same way. And so those are the patterns you like to try and find through this process and really gain a solid understanding of. So, but we don't stop there. What a lot of times we'll do what's called usability testing. Has anybody ever participated in the usability test in here? Okay, so a few people, that's great. So usability is the other side of it. So the one thing is a lot of organizations will stop there with the information architecture about how people might find things. But what I said earlier that's really important, especially around an intranet, is intranets are functional based. Otherwise, it's not only about finding a piece of information, it's about the task I'm doing at that moment to find that piece of information. So from a usability testing standpoint, we'll actually have people get in front of a computer and we'll actually ask them questions like, we've done everything from, how do you find a particular piece of information to you need to go out and file a time off request. How are you going to do that? And then you just let them go and you watch. And at the end of the process, if we're doing this well, this should be a very fun and painless process. If you do this on your current intranet, before you fix anything, you might be prepared to cry. Because you might be very, very disappointed. Because you might have some link in the middle of the page that says, click this button now, and nobody sees it. And you can't figure out why nobody sees that link right there. And there could be a million reasons. But one thing you'll find is that you'll find that people don't do it. We don't do as much on intranets about pre-testing as we do on the public world. But I have actually seen a CEO break down into tears when she watched how people failed on their website that was a key part of their business. That was actually an important thing. It was for people to go there to actually do something, and they couldn't figure out how to get past the homepage because none of it made sense. So this is very valuable. And from there, you're really looking. So when we do usability testing, we look at heuristics. So heuristics really are measurements that we can gauge. So we're looking at how easy is it to learn. I already said, if your main intranet is something that you have to teach your people, you've probably already failed. So it should be very easy to learn. People should be able to look at it and be able to do something on their own. How efficiently can they move through the system? This is absolutely critical because there were a number of years that in the world of web and everything, we thought efficiency meant clicks. If somebody had to click more than a couple times, that wasn't efficient. But that's not true at all. What we've learned is it's about, can I figure out where to click? I'm willing to click 10 times as long as each time I click it, I feel like I know where I'm going. If I'm confused and I'm clicking in, I'm clicking out, I'm clicking in, I'm clicking out, then I get frustrated. But efficiency is actually about people understanding how to get to something efficiently. How memorable is it? If I need to go to your intranet and then I don't visit it for 3 months and I go back to it and I can't figure out what I did before and I have to go relearn it, that's not a memorable experience. And that's very important from that side. Errors. Well, the good news is if you ever get an error in SharePoint, it makes a lot of sense. It tells you exactly what it is and how to fix it, right? At least I got a couple laughs out of that. But right there, it's amazing how many times. And so one of the things that I actually love about usability testing is when people create mistakes happen or the system doesn't respond right, the number of people that, oh, what'd I do? Did I do that? What happened there? And they'll tell you your system sucks, but behind the scenes, they're actually thinking, oh my God, I broke their site. How did I do that? In there. And so it's amazing how many people will just get intimidated by that because they don't know what to do. And then in something like SharePoint where you get correlation ID, let's see how many numbers and letters I can scroll across the screen, and that's what happens. People really freak out and it's like, oh my God, I just broke our intranet, I'm going to get fired. And I've talked to people that have hit those errors. They were like, I wasn't going to tell anybody because I thought maybe I broke it. And the last one here, we can't trivialize this that people like to have a good time with it. I mean, it's not like work going on your intranet. You're going to be like, woo, yay, I love going on our intranet. But at the same time, it shouldn't look like crap. It should actually look like something that somebody would actually want to use and actually go through. So we look at all these different things and we really kind of understand them from the different levels about how people really do it. So we've done kind of more of the informational side, and now we've kind of brought in more of that human aspect about how people might actually do this stuff. And together, we're able to create a very good map on what we might want to do from there. So some of the other things that we can do that I find very valuable, and it's amazing how much we don't do this. In that, search logs, looking through your logs and really learning from that. So many years ago on the public website side, I worked with the Department of Agriculture in the US. And this was back when clean energy was just becoming very popular. They started bringing it in. We were talking about ethanol, biodiesel, everything like that. And they were really frustrated, and they brought us in when we were working on the website. They were very frustrated because people weren't finding this. They weren't getting a lot of visits on their pages that they wanted people to be visiting because this was the big push and everything was about this stuff. Well, we went and we looked through their search logs, and this wasn't in SharePoint. This was in another system, but the principle still applies. And you know what we found? Do you know how many ways there are to spell the word biodiesel? Wrong. So into the hundreds and thousands of searches for the word biodiesel. On their list, number 17 was the correct way of spelling it. and it maybe had a few thousand ones, versus BIDESILE. There were so many crazy things, and we forgot, oh yeah, that's right, government websites in the US are supposed to be for an 8th grade reading level. Guess what? Most typical 8th graders don't know how to spell the word biodiesel. And so what they found from that very easily was people weren't getting this stuff because they didn't know how to do it. They have another thing that they publish each year called the Green Book. And at that time, if you typed in the word Green Book, all one word, you found the Green Book. But if you typed in the word green space book, you didn't find it. If you did the Old English version of green with the E at the end, you didn't find it either. Sorry, that was my attempt at British humor. And that obviously didn't go very well. But the fact of the matter is we had these things that people didn't even think about that were very, very simple things to take care of that they learned from their search logs. Search logs can be very valuable. And in your SharePoint system, if you as a business owner have not looked at those things to learn, because the other thing you're going to find out is what people looked at. What are they actually searching for? What are they looking for in that? And there's many obvious things that you're like, how are they not finding that? One of my favorite ones is like holiday calendar. That's usually in most organizations one of the top reasons people look. And so we've got a client right now, and the number one frustration we said is I search on our holiday calendar, and it pulls up the holiday calendar from 2009. And the one from 2015 is nowhere to be found. Well, why is that? Because nobody really thought of that or looked at that and how you could actually finesse the search results, that kind of stuff. The other side is web analytics. Do not use SharePoint Web Analytics because they're still crap, and I'm pretty sure they're going to continue to be crap for the rest of eternity. They don't really tell you much. If you don't have something like Google Analytics in your system, you should, because it's going to teach you and share you so much more. One of my favorite things there to do it is what do people really look for? Where do they actually go on there? How do non-search people look for information? Our assumption is if we have a good search. So one of the things you can tell is these have an inverse relationship here. If most of the people in your organization search, that's usually because your information architecture sucks. If people go do a lot of clicking, it tends to be that either your information architecture is good or your search sucks. It's a very good way to be able to indicate that. If you have a good balance, because advanced users will tend to search first. Basic users will tend to click. And that. When they can't find something, they go to search. Well, people are bad searchers in the first place, so they don't know how to search in the first place. So the number of times I've done a usability study and somebody's went in looking for some type of specific form and goes up into the search box and types the word form and hits enter in that. Anybody want to guess how many times the word form is used in SharePoint without putting any content into it? But that's the reality. So we start doing this, so we look at something. So one of my favorite things on Google Analytics to look at is what they call behavioral flow. So behavioral flow will actually show you not only your content, but it'll show how people actually move through your content. And you can run a bunch of scenarios and do a bunch of things where you can start to see. So this is actually our blog site. It goes in there, and you can see most people come in on this one particular blog. It's actually a SharePoint chart web part 2013 post that we did like 4 years ago. That's where most of our blog gets its traffic in there. And then you get to the second one. One of my project managers wrote something on Kanban strategy, and that's there. And then way down here at the small one there, that's people that actually go to our blog because they care. In that, so it's really small. But you can start to see those paths that they do. And one of the things I love about Google Analytics is the same thing that I love about the technology community in the first place. There's a lot of people that have a lot less of a life than I do that are much more willing to stay up till 5 in the morning and build really cool crap in that. And so what I like to do is use their really cool crap. And so Google built a really good analytics engine that you can click up. It's not on this screen, but you can actually go to the top and you can actually click on a link to be able to download all these dashboards that people have built and worked really hard that really know a lot about it, that you can look at this data in so many different ways. And you can learn so much from it. So even if you can't talk to your people and you can't really look at this stuff, you do have that ability to really kind of take this and find out a lot of information on your own before you even start going through that process. And there. So we're going to just briefly kind of go through some of the things that we can apply to this learning. Like I said, tomorrow I'm going to be focusing a lot more on this, but I wanted to add a few slides in here just because some people might not be able to get up in the morning at 9, or some people may choose not to come to my session at 9. I know that second one is probably a lot less likely than the first, but we'll go with that anyway. So the first thing I want to say is that getting around should be easy. That's the first thing. If you've taken anything away from this, from that side, is when we're building stuff, things should be easy. So we should be organizing our information around the people, the way people think. So in the States, I like to compare it to a multiple choice test. So a multiple choice test is really the way your navigation should always exist. So there's two types of people that take multiple choice or the way they answer multiple choice. The first type is the person that knows the right answer, and that's a great way. If you look at a navigation structure and you know I need to go here, that's awesome. But then there's that other side, the people that aren't really real sure where to go. And if I look at that one and I'm not real sure, but I look at the other ones and I'm not sure about those either, I failed. So the best thing is, if you're not one of the people that study for a multiple choice test, is that you at least know enough to know the other 3 answers are wrong in that. And so one of the most famous things I see inside an organization is you have 3 links: policies, procedures, and processes in that. And I go into organizations all the time and say, can anybody tell me what the difference is between a policy, a procedure, and a process? Yes, somebody from human resources can, but nobody else on the planet knows what the difference is. So when you're building navigation structures and flow structures, if you have things that are so very similar in that structure that people are not going to be sure, you're going to already confuse them up front. So you want to make sure that you have that balance around that. And so you can have very simple navigations. Again, people tend to stray away from this because they think, well, that doesn't give them enough options. I'm going to say, no, actually, that gives them enough options. But if you really need to give them a lot of options, we've actually found the mega menu type of structure there, where you have links and they're grouped by kind of subcontext, and that to be a very effective method of that. But overall, even if you were able to read through this entire list, you would tell that there's big differentiators between those that would make a lot of sense to the people in that organization. Good design supports function in that. So this, again, is very, very important, is that we're not just about pretty pictures and pretty design. We should be there for a purpose to get people to what they are. The #1 failure from the SharePoint 2013 interface side was that they went to this really cool look and feel that didn't make a lot of sense to a lot of people. You need to establish between the design and getting people to where they need, and color contrast is actually very helpful in this nature, in that having a lot of color and that kind of stuff. And actually it's funny because all the time I read people, it's like, keep it really simple, and I'll actually say use more color because you can actually differentiate stuff much better. So if you're going to go mobile, don't, unless you actually know for a fact that people want to access your intranet on their phones. When people talk about mobile, the #1 thing you should find out is whether they're talking about their tablets. Because most people these days are talking about their tablets, and SharePoint looks the same on a desktop as a tablet now. Phones, it looks different, but I have yet to find anybody outside some executive that talked to some salesperson from Microsoft that ever has went like, man, you know what, while I'm headed to the toilet, I want to look up the latest company news on my phone. So an example of too little is right here. Microsoft really screwed up when they built this site with so much white space. People all the time, we did a usability study around this, comparing this to SharePoint 2010. And on the end user side, this failed much more miserably because people can't differentiate. It just looks like one big white glob with a little bit of blue spots in the middle of it versus something that actually has context. So what really needs to happen is you need to have more contrast to really understand the different sides. So then you have the other side, and I don't know who the hell at Microsoft decides to make these damn templates that they do, but my God, if they don't look at the most obnoxious things on earth and sit there and say, boy, I hope you change your site to look like that, because that'll be really fun. So you have the other side where we just go way too crazy with this stuff. And then we have the third side. And so when I look at this, the reason I bring this up is because you have the contrast there. And I just showed this slide at another conference where they didn't have a very good screen, so I'm glad this one. But you can really notice where the navigation is. You can notice the separation between the different areas in that. You've used color to really be able to enhance the experience. If you really want to take that to the nth degree, look at a magazine. Magazines are absolutely excellent at putting a ton of crap on a single page, and you turn to that page and not thinking, oh my God, there's so much stuff here. And that's because they've used shape, they've used lines, they've used colors to be able to do it, because the mind really wants to look at things differently. And the thing that we forget about is that's even more extreme on a computer. Now, if it was something like Outlook that I look at every day and you had a bunch of obnoxious colors, that would be really annoying. But when you think about your intranet, people are not sitting on there 24/7. So you want to find that right contrast to be able to really get them to what they want to do. Oh, this one right here. So I'm doing a lot of this right here. As a matter of fact, I'm doing a lot of using SharePoint to front-end other public website content management systems, because SharePoint 2013 does have the best search engine on the market. That's one thing. You hear me criticize Microsoft a lot. I will never do it. But from search, you've really got to have it work. And why? Because first and foremost, people are just really shitty at searching. They don't know how to do this. They don't really know how to spell. They don't know how to do anything around search and aren't really sure. But refiners. So how many of you have SharePoint 2010 or 2013? And that, yeah, everybody knows what I'm talking about when I say the refiners on the side. So sometimes I just, as I just complimented them about they're going to search, I'm going to say then they have a whole nother side of brilliance. I have done this for a really long time, and I have yet to see anybody do search and say, well, I didn't get the results I needed, but I know for a fact it's a PDF. Click. Or I know for a fact this person wrote that document. Click. What are the first two things that show up in a refiners? The type of document and the author who wrote it, and when it was last modified. Three of the most useless things on earth, because nobody ever knows nor cares about that stuff. So if you do anything else with your search, look at what other refiners are possible and put them up top, because they're all going to be much more valuable than those three pieces of there. Remove SharePoint objects from your system. So if you're doing a search and you're hitting like the core list look of a document library or a list in that, nobody's looking for a list or a library or a site. They're looking for a piece of information. And this is a great use of 2013. And so that's one of my favorite things that I like to do there in that. So here's an example, and I'm actually building this almost 100% right now, where we're actually pulling information in from a lot of different systems. This is actually for an internal organization, but we're bringing this all in. And so Google and Bing and all those guys actually do a really good job of showing results, and that sometimes they can be so overwhelming we can show a lot of things in a very small area, yet be able to show it differently to give it more context of what we're doing. From the results to the videos to the people to how we filter and everything, we can take these and actually do a lot of really cool things with them and actually make very useful search results in that. And so the last one I want to go on here is just remember that documents aren't content. When you're building out things, you can't be based. If all you do is have lists of links to documents on your system, then you're probably not really thinking about it well, because people don't have patience to read documents, and documents should really be used for long pieces of information, not just short little blurbs and sentences that people need to do. So you really need to look at that content side of things, from developing standards, finding a good balance between too much information and too little, and making sure just because it resides somewhere doesn't mean people want to go there. And so the perfect thing is what I like to call the mine, mine, mine principle. In that, and actually Paul Hunt, another speaker here, when I told that over in Belgium, he sent me this picture, and I forgot about it, from Finding Nemo, where you've got the little seagulls that go, mine, 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 like that. But it's exactly what it is. Why are we storing it in your site, and why do you want everybody to come? Because it's mine. But what do you mean? Well, it's mine, and I want to hold it, and I want to touch it, and I want to pet it, and everything else. It's mine, that's what I want. And so a lot of times the great thing, especially about the technology in 2013, is we can now build a system, which I'm going to talk about tomorrow, about how we build a system where we can let people store information wherever we want, follow a few rules, and we can do what we want with it. So the last thing I'm going to leave you with, and this is my very last slide, is if you do nothing else when you walk out of this, if you go through and you actually build out this great new site, the day you launch is not the last day of the project. That's actually the very beginning, because you have to pay attention. I've built some really great projects with some really great clients and done some really fun and cool and crazy things. For them to not look at it again for another year and then wonder why it didn't work out so well. So when you get done with this whole process, you have to pay attention. Once you figure out your people, you have to pay attention. Once you understand how you're going to do things, you have to pay attention to be able to understand and actually be able to do something for your people. So I'm perfect. I mean, like literally like perfect on there. John's just chomping at the bit because he wants to tell you about goals. So from there, thank you all very much. I really appreciate you attending my session.